for allowing the Dawkins Foundation to co-host this. It's been a great pleasure to do that. Josh has put together a very short 3-minute video to promote the foundation to, frankly, to would-be donors. Doesn't include anybody here. We're not pitching for money here, but for pitching for money elsewhere. I'm just going to play the 3-minute video first before I start.
Science is the best tool ever devised for understanding how the world works.
Science is part of culture, and without science we cannot understand ourselves and we cannot understand the more than the world.
You know, it's unfortunate. I think many people still see science as a subject that they studied in school but left behind when they took their final exam. To me, science is really a way of life. It's a perspective, it's an outlook, it's a way of engaging with the world so that one can employ rational reasoning, deductive logic to really understand what's true, what's right, and what's actually accurate about the world around us. And that is not a subject, that's a perspective.
I think that science changes the way my...
Science is part of culture, and without science we cannot understand ourselves and we cannot understand the more than the world.
You know, it's unfortunate. I think many people still see...
Thank you very much, Josh Timmer. I'm on a book tour, and I'm afraid you're going to get a bit of that. What I've done is to take the last chapter of my book. Jerry so effectively this afternoon covered all the evidence for evolution, which is what my book is about as well. So I wouldn't even attempt to do the same thing as that. What I'm going to do is just take the last chapter. The last chapter of my book, There is Grandeur, is based upon the last paragraph of Darwin's Origin of Species. Every section heading in my last chapter is one sentence of Darwin's last paragraph. So what I've done is just to take the last paragraph of Darwin and make an exegesis of each sentence. Unlike his evolutionist grandfather, Erasmus, who scientific verse was somewhat surprisingly, I have to say, admired by Wordsworth and Coleridge, Charles Darwin was not known as a poet, but he rose to a lyrical crescendo in the last paragraph of The Origin of Species. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Clear-headed as ever, Darwin recognized the moral paradox at the heart of his great theory. He didn't mince words, but he offered the comforting reflection that nature has no evil intentions. Things simply follow from laws acting all around us. To quote an earlier sentence from the same paragraph, he had said something similar at the end of chapter 7 of The Origin. It may not be a logical deduction, but to my imagination, it is far more satisfactory to look at such instincts as the young cuckoo rejecting its foster brothers, ants making slaves, the larvae of ichneumonidae feeding within the live bodies of caterpillars, not as specially endowed or created instincts, but as small consequences of one general law leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely multiply, vary, let the strongest live, and the weakest die. One of the reasons sometimes advanced by historians for Darwin's loss of faith was his revulsion at the cruelty, or rather the callous indifference, of nature. This was not just an incidental fact. Darwin realized that it followed from the theory of natural selection itself. Darwin had a particular thing about the female immune wasp's habit of stinging its victim to paralyze but not kill it, thereby keeping the meat fresh for its larvae as it eats the live prey from within. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the immune monarchy with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. That picture's not actually an inhuman, it's a digger wasp, Ammophila, which does the same thing. The story's even more macabre because the wasp, used according to Farm, methodically stings each ganglion down the ventral side of the caterpillar so that it stays alive but can't move. Darwin couldn't persuade himself that a beneficent creator would conceive such a habit. But with natural selection in the driving seat, all becomes clear, understandable, and sensible. Natural selection cares naught for any comfort. Why should it? For something to happen in nature, the only requirement is that the same happening in ancestral times assisted the survival of the genes promoting it. Gene survival is a sufficient explanation for the cruelty of wasps and the callous indifference of all nature, sufficient and satisfying to the intellect, if not to human compassion. Yes, there is grandeur in this view of life, and even a kind of grandeur in nature's serene indifference to the suffering which inexorably follows in the wake of its guiding principle, survival of the fittest. Theologians, if there are any present, should feel free to wince at this echo of a familiar ploy in theodicy, in which suffering is seen as an inevitable correlate of free will. Biologists, for their part, will find inexorably by no means too strong when they reflect on the biological function of the capacity to suffer. Suffering is there for a reason. It's a signal that all is not well, a signal to the animal to do something to reduce the suffering. If animals are not suffering, somebody, a predator perhaps or a parasite, isn't working hard enough in the business of gene survival. Scientists are human, and they're as entitled as anyone to revile cruelty and abhor suffering. But good scientists, like Darwin, recognize that truths about the real world have to be faced, however distasteful. Moreover, if we're going to admit subjective considerations, there is a fascination in the bleak logic that pervades all of life, including wasps homing in on the nerve ganglia down the length of their prey, cuckoos ejecting their foster brothers, slave-making ants, and the single-minded, or rather zero-minded, indifference to suffering shown by all parasites and predators. Darwin was bending over backwards to console when he concluded his chapter on the struggle for survival with these words: all that we can do is to keep steadily in mind that each organic being is striving to increase at a geometrical ratio, that each at some period of its life, during some season of the year, during each generation or at intervals, has to struggle for life and to suffer great destruction. When we reflect on this struggle, we may console ourselves with the full belief that the law of nature is not incessant, that no fear is felt, that death is generally prompt, and that the vigorous, the healthy, and the happy survive and multiply. Shooting the messenger is one of humanity's sillier foibles. It underlies a good slice of the opposition to evolution that is so lamentably widespread, especially in America. Teach children that they're animals and they'll behave like animals. Even if it were true that evolution, or the teaching of evolution, encouraged immorality, that would not imply that the theory of evolution was